Hello, this is Dr. Jean, dear future people. Today we are going to talk about two of the ugliest topics in the whole series. We are going to talk about parasites and money. Well, of course, in 2022, well, I guess now 2023, people love their money. They are in love with their parasites as well. They hold their parasites in very high esteem, and the bond between them is so strong that it's impossible to break. But then they wouldn't want to break it either. How is this? How did this come about? Well, we're going to talk about those things today. And we are going to present an alternative view which regards parasitism is something to be avoided because it has very serious side effects that we do not want to uphold. Well, let's define parasitism first. Parasitism is defined as the use of one organism to the sole benefit of another, a hidden hierarchy, a hidden slavery. And from this, you can immediately see that what we talked about before, the origin and the nature of cancer, falls into this category. In other words, cancer is a form of parasitism. You can also see from this definition that from the point of view of a parasite, the environment of the parasite, the host, is not part of an organic reality. It is a separate entity, and the parasite believes that the host is something separate altogether, something to be used, something to be exploited. And so, therefore, the parasite, exactly like the cancer cell, refuses to be an organic part of the whole organism. Well, this hidden slavery is exposed by careful examination of the relationship between the host and the parasite and the assessment of host development. Because there are two things that are needed for a parasitic relationship between host and parasite. From the point of view of the parasite needs to feel that they are superior, that they are exclusive, that they are somehow better or closer to some kind of centrality, or in general have distinguishing properties. From the point of view of the organism, there has to be a disease, usually a mental disease, a disharmonious, disproportional development. Now, again, remember, we have the analogy of viruses here, viruses as parasites. And we have here a worm and an apple as an analogy to make this easier to see. So the hidden slavery that is necessary for a host to become a victim of a parasite is readily recognizable because the host, instead of looking at the local uniqueness, instead of looking at the unique life experiences and then digesting them, processing them, and integrating them, we'll have an outside focus. In other words, the focus will be to a distant point, something that is considered to be separate from the identity of the local host. So then there is an emphasis of a single, fixed, objective external goal or goals at the expense of a more rounded development. So then, when this happens, sooner or later, tension arises from disproportionate development. It is either masked by fanaticism, or nowadays, much more often, it is masked by diversion. So the attention of the host is diverted by entertainment, by addiction, or whatnot, so that the whole thing is masked. Therefore, the term hidden slavery. So this distorted, disproportional development is covered up, and it is kind of half compensated. So this sooner or later will lead to ill feeling. The host feels that something is not right, that the diversion cannot mask fully what's going on. And at that point, when the diversions are not enough, where the addictions are not enough anymore, that's when depression sets in. But since it's hidden, the origin of the problem is not at all obvious. So that we have a depression that we are going to treat with a symptomatic treatment, with medications, for example, or with some kind of general psychological technique. But again, the origin of the problem, the root cause, is ignored. A part of this spectrum of disease is somatization. So you have various chronic diseases, chronic pain, chronic disease arising from unhealthy habits and lifestyles. And these are side effects of the compensation which is necessary to cover up the original problem. And these, of course, include pleasure eating, hypersexuality, or substance abuse, or various different other things. So we need to understand that parasites, in addition to having a separate identity, they need certain techniques to get inside. And to get inside, in the case of a human being, into the mind of the human being. So they need a vehicle. They need something that carries them inside the mind of the victim. So what can be a useful and very effective vehicle to get inside the mind of the future victim? Well, of course, promise of miraculous support or some kind of assistance, providing protection and comfort. You see, from the point of view of Vitologia, of course you need cooperation. That is only natural. You need social cooperation, you need some degree of coordination for that. But basically, your focus is not fixed. Your focus is more general. But if you neglect this, if you do not listen your own uniqueness and you do not adequately cultivate your mind, then you need support. Then you need assistance. Then you delegate out what is a natural mind function, a local mind function. And this mechanism is called representation. Representation is when you delegate out your natural inner processes, your unique processes, and therefore you make your own unique inner function a kind of standard outside function. So that's what representation means. That's where representation leads us. So you feel that you are clinging, you are attached to something greater, But that something greater is not you. That something greater is an outside power. It's a greater power that is going to support you, like an institution, like a source of wealth, or like a religious idol. In other words, a kind of centrality, right? So the more you neglect your local uniqueness, the more you neglect your life experience mechanism, the more you need a fixed outside focus, the extreme of which is idolatry. And you also need entertainment and pleasure as diversion, because entertainment and pleasure, if, of course, is also an external focus, which diverts your mind from the really important things to something external, something distant, something that pretends to be important, but in fact it's not. And that's what idolatry is also. Something that pretends to be central, something that pretends to be extremely important, but in fact it is not. So what you need to understand that the parasite here in this picture looks ugly. Here in this picture looks invisible. But in a real life, the parasite is friendly, a helper, a promiser, always smiling. It's very impressive. You know, the parasites are not ugly at all. The parasites are beautiful people who you are attracted to. They are funny. They are impressive in every way. They always offer mediation and representation. You see, because they are separate entities, they are closer to some kind of outside focus. They are closer to some kind of centrality. So they represent you. They mediate for you. Parasites are always an authority. They are always experts. They always give you a superior kind of service, right? And so by this mechanism, belief and trust of the host is always oriented toward the outside. There is support seeking, there is miracle worshiping, resulting in dependence. Remember, even addiction, like substance addiction, for example, results in dependence. Or it may be a computer game, or it may be a show, or it may be anything that you feel attached to. And this always, without exception at all, loses to loss of identity, loss of uniqueness, lack of self-confidence, initiative, and imagination. So, idolatry with representation and authority is the ultimate, the most effective form of parasitism in humans. Why? Because in humans, most parasites are not biological. In humans, parasites attach and reprogram the mind, right? So they are mind parasites, mind worms, mind viruses. So this dependence then creates a hierarchy. Why? Because you see your helpers as in some ways superior. So you have institutions with fixed positions, competition, and representation. And this all comes from the inside weakness, the distorted development of the local mind. You see, the two things are really very closely attached. So hierarchy and dependence then create the need for compensation. And this compensation creates the ego, the individual separate identity, right? And this ego will then also create the illusion of separate units and of numbers. Because without separation, there is no multitude. And of course, uniformity is also needed for that. And if there is separation and there's uniformity and there are numbers, then you have hierarchy, a hierarchy based on idolatry and addiction. So the individual interest with individual responsibility and happiness is the fixed unit idea. So individual responsibility, individual happiness, individual interest are separate, they are exclusive, and they are assigned a fixed unit, which is the ego. So an organic system, so that's here. You see that there are these separate units, and they are part of a functional system. Now, from the point of view of Vitologia, this mechanism makes no sense. We transcend this mechanism because we are part of an organism. We have uniqueness, and we have a very complex and close connection to our environment. And we do not represent a unit with a useful function. We represent a unique and organic and irreplaceable part of the whole of organic reality. So from the point of view of the parasite, the individual is separate and it performs a useful function. So because there are separate individuals with certain standard functions, then therefore there are going to be classes, categories, sets of separate countable entities. So you see people from the point of view of a certain function that they perform for you. That's how parasites look at things. So idolatry is always schematic. It's discontinuous. It operates always with numbers because as it looks at a locality only from a certain point of view, it sees locality as quasi-dimensional, considering only a small number of variables that are necessary to perform that function. Therefore, they are going to make categories out of you, classes out of you, separate sets out of you. So, for example, this class is made up by people who perform this task. And this class is going to be made up by people who need these kind of things. Okay? So there's always this categorizations. Why? Because they look at you only from a functional point of view. How your function will serve their interests. That's how parasites operate. So then, enough about the point of view of the parasites. Now, let's talk about the point of view of the host. How is it that you can defend yourself from parasitism? Well, first of all, you have to understand that parasitism is not going to be good for you. On the short run, yes, you are going to enjoy it because you are going to get some kind of protection or support or a special service or some kind of enjoyment. But on the long run, it's going to destroy you, right? Because it destroys what is important for you. That is your uniqueness, your integrity, your harmony. So you have to revert back to what we said before. And that is, you need to maintain your local uniqueness, right? You need to cultivate your mind, and not only you as an individual, but you as a group, you as a community. There has to be a community spirit, right? And this community spirit needs to be special. It needs to be unique. Because if it is not, if it becomes a machine, if it becomes a function, then you will go down to the path of categorizations, classes, hierarchies, representation, and idolatry. So you need to prevent that. You need to prevent that by understanding your uniqueness. Again, uniqueness only prevents you from cooperating with others if you believe that your uniqueness is separate. No, your uniqueness needs to add to social cooperation. And that's going to be very hard. And you need a maintenance, a high maintenance for that. So your mental activity needs to maintain your local uniqueness. And that includes maintaining traditions, because traditions are also a manifestation of local uniqueness on a group or community level. So mental activity means that your life experience needs to be unique. You need to have constant checking, rechecking, reinterpreting, reviewing any kind of stimulus. And with digesting and processing these local stimuli, you will then achieve a local harmony. You need to maintain unique dynamics and patterns in your own environment, right? And forget about fixed positions, ideas, and universal effects. So from the point of view of Vitologia, you have no distinct fixed functional units. You have no ego. You have no separate individual self. Yes, you have individuality, and that means specialness. That means peculiarness. That means non-average uniqueness, right? But the whole thing is non-separate. You are an organic part of an organism, right? And therefore, you do not have an outside orientation. Your attention is not fixed. It's not fixated on a distant thing, which is called an idol. You're looking at your own environment, because that environment is part of you, and that environment is part of an organism of which you are an organic part. Remember when you cut through a leg. So now, idolatry and parasitism requires that your attention is oriented toward the distant outside center. And this focus is held by representation, because representatives want to mediate between you and an outside center, which is always artificial, always imaginary, right? They want to separate you out from the divine. They want to make you believe that the divine is something very far away, very distinct from you. Because if you understand that the divine nature of reality is not discontinuous, then there is no need for mediation. There is no need for representation. There is a need for cooperation, yes. But since there is no separation between you and a distant center, therefore, there is no need for mediation. So transcendent thought is attention oriented toward an organic community here and now, without representation or distance. There is no distance between you and the divine. There's no distance between you and reality. The two things are in organic relationship, and they are inseparable. So slavery, idolatry, parasitism always means to look at things as universal, objective, uniform, functional, categorical, with fixed ideas, fixed categories, fixed functional entities. And then from that, you have categories and classes. You are a member of this class or that class or that class, or this race or that race or that race. You cannot be that because you transcend these categories. You transcend these classes. Why? Because you use multiple dimensions, right? So you are not member of this class from this point of view, but you have wide attention. You are this, but also that, and also that, and also that. And you are non-separate from your environment, so you cannot be counted. So transcendent thought means an organic complexity with local uniqueness based on the life experience mechanism. And there is a sacredness to this locality. And it's based on uniquely processed, digested, integrated information, which you do not delegate out to representatives and mediators. Because if you do that, then you use your unique patterns. You lose your natural matrix thinking. Matrix thinking here, of course, means that you use multiple dimensions. You do not look at things from fixed points of view. You have a wide attention. So remember, whenever you see a fixed, separate individual entity, that means that there is an artificial separation between you and an organic reality. And that means that there is representation toward a distant idol, and that means that you are in a situation of a parasitic attack. So an organic community with divine essence at no distance, the divine essence is here, not there. And the parasite would try to alienate you from this organic divine reality by creating an artificial distance so that it creates for itself a function. But you are going to transcend that. And you value no distance. Remember when we talked about distance as a useful category or a useful mechanism to describe an idealized form of traveling? And remember when we talked about the thinker traveler, when we said that your unique path is a value in itself? Well, you need to work on that because you need to understand that you cannot delegate out your values, okay? So you need an organic community rather than idolatry. So this whole thing can be summarized in this sentence, that a cultivated mind is no breeding ground for parasites. If you have a cultivated mind, and please understand that I'm not talking about necessarily an individual. I'm talking about a cultivated community mind, a cultivated group mind, right? That prevents you from being infested by parasites. And you're going to have harmonious development, uniqueness, imagination, non-separation versus your environment. The bugs stop here. They cannot enter if you have such a power inside you or inside your group or your community. And that leads us to our next topic, and that is money. Well, first of all, there are all kinds of definitions of money, like it is a kind of debt, it is a kind of universal currency. Okay, these are all good definitions, but from our point of view, they're not going to be enough. From our point of view, money is going to be a quantitative expression of trust. I know it's written as qualitative here, but it's really a quantitative expression of trust. And trusting someone to take over the organization or execution of certain tasks that you are trying to perform, chores or work or whatever. So From this, you can immediately see what money and an economy based on money is all about. That you are delegating out things. And of course, there's a lot to say about that. I mean, maybe somebody is better in certain things, and then you cooperate with them, and then you do this for them, and they do this for you. Okay? But always remember that you can delegate out certain things. Okay? So you may have somebody wash your car, and that's good. But there are certain core things that if you delegate out, you are going to lose your identity. And that's going to be a big problem. So these chores may also include processing, organization, and integration. And these are core processes of the mind. You may not delegate these out without serious side effects. Cooperation is natural, but it involves the risk of dependence, especially if duty taken over involves core functions such as these, or core relationships. A small part of identity is always lost. And that's okay. If your identity is strong, then you may lose some part of your identity, yes, and that's fine. But if enough of the core functions and relationships are involved, okay, then instead of having a higher identity, you delegate out your identity. You lose your identity. So if your identity is getting higher because of the cooperation, so if you have the feeling that you're part of an organism because you cooperate with others, that's wonderful. For instance, you may have a professional cooperation or even a spiritual cooperation, and that is as wonderful. Like, for example, taking your child to a pediatrician, that's of course great. But if this involves core processes, then you have a problem because you are going to run into parasites. So a small part of your identity may be risky, but if you lose your core identity, things that are really important, your beliefs, your uniqueness, then you are going to go into a situation when somebody will create a dream world for you, like in fiction. And that may influence your original thought and your individual uniqueness, unless, of course, you process these things adequately. So money, especially with mass production and mass communications, tend to create universal solutions, standard solution. So in other words, instead of unique taste, unique desires, unique needs, which are adapted to local circumstances, like, for example, this food specially cooked for you by a relative or a friend or by yourself. And instead of that, you have a universal, standard, fixed choice, right? And usually a quite limited choice of standard and fixed things. By choosing manufactured desires, dreams, solutions, part of your local identity is lost. Why? Because your unique needs, your unique tastes, your unique circumstances are to some degree ignored. Whereas if you cook things, then you have an attention to the person you are cooking for, and that person's unique tastes and needs are considered with care and loving detail. So a creative life force is everywhere, having the potentiality for unique expression. Well, if this is neglected, then you have standards. Then you have simple coordination. And they are necessary because similar patterns often require similar conditions, similar solutions, sorry. But this whole thing has limits. Even disease patterns are to a degree different in each community and in each individual. So that an imaginary universal reference, such as quantified by money as a value, only partially applies because of local uniqueness. So money as a value is an objective universal reference frame. It's the same thing as treating a patient by a protocol, and the protocol is certainly very helpful. So I'm not talking against protocols here. Protocols are very helpful. You need to fall back on these protocols when in doubt. But you can transcend these protocols like you can transcend money if you are able to integrate and process and understand the specific case, the specific situation, the specific individual. Okay, that's in addition to the knowledge that the protocol is based on. So notice that money is absolute, objective, and universal. And it's based on trust. And because it is objective, universal, and fixed, it's always based on crude approximation of individual needs, of local uniqueness. So if one worships money, one also overestimates its absolute, objective, universal nature and believes that money is the same thing everywhere. Okay, because you ignore locality. So believing in absolute, objective, universal reference frames in general is idolatry. And with money, it's no different. So if you believe that money is an objective, universal, absolute thing, then you engage in idolatry. Because you extend things by linear extrapolation. And you extend the importance of money also by overemphasizing similarities in needs, in solutions, in patterns and trends, based on the idea that what is here and now is everywhere and all the time. You extend mechanically your own experience. So again, idolatry leads to loss of identity. So since money is idolatry, it also means that you are going to lose part of your identity by merely using money. Loss of immunity, loss representation, and parasitism. It's intrinsic, it's an inherent nature of the money concept, because money by definition is objective, universal, and absolute. So mental activity not adapted to local uniqueness and mechanically placed into a standard universal reference frame is artificial. Okay, it's not natural. And it's imaginary. It's not real. Well, it's real as imaginary, okay, but not independent of the imagination. Money as religion, you believe that there are such things as comparable, uniform, standard, quantifiable, separate things. That's the basis of your belief system. Notice that this whole mechanism also leads to something else. Remember, you are engaging in posi-dimensional thinking. That means that when you judge things, when you compare things, you only look at a small number of dimensions. And because you are looking at a small number of dimensions, that means that you are going to overemphasize similarities, and you are going to ignore differences. So this is going to mean that you are going to have a smaller world, okay, than you should, based on transcendent thought. And that means that since you are looking everything from a local viewpoint, and that local viewpoint is exclusive, so local viewpoints are fine, so far as you understand that Your locality is part of a great whole, great organism. But if you are looking at a separate and exclusive local viewpoint, something, then you are going to make that something smaller and more similar. So you are going to have a small world with distant people, not very, very, very different things from your usual standard viewpoint. So money as a religion is also a religion as foreign help, outside help. So gain, hoarding, dealing, lack of appreciation of local uniqueness, local expression, specificity, and creative difference. So gaining, hoarding, dealing means that you are focusing on numbers, on quantities. And quantities and numbers always mean, without exception, some degree of loss of specificity, of loss of uniqueness, of loss of an organic viewpoint. So money leads to addiction and slavery, not because of its abuse, but its very concept, its inherent nature. Because money is based on the fundamental components of idolatry, which are the absolute, the concept of the absolute, standardization, and the concept of relative small differences. That means universality. So not surprisingly then, in the next video, we're going to talk about religion. Because we need to understand that religion can be different from idolatry. And to summarize this, we are seeing very important patterns here. We look at things as organic. We look at things from different points of view. And because we do, we see uniqueness. And any standardization and any centrality is something to be transcended, right? So we are going to stop here, and the next video is going to talk about religion and how religion can be organic. So thank you for your attention, and goodbye for now.